Okay, I've got the enviable task of being almost the last speaker on a really long day, but in my other life I teach at the BC Institute of Technology, so I'm really accustomed to speaking to groups of sleeping people, so feel free. Oops, which one am I doing here? I'm going to start talking about the organics disposal ban we have in Metro Vancouver, and I realized that the organics disposal ban is really more of an initiative that pushes food into the recycling/composting side of things rather than reduction. But it is still something that I really should speak about because it's the biggest thing we've done in a long time. Since about 1997, Metro Vancouver's had various disposal bans on certain recyclable materials, and we've been adding to them every few years since. In 2015, we brought in our organics disposal ban, which really meant food scraps because we had already had a disposal ban on yard trimmings. These are actual photos from loads of waste that were being tipped at our disposal sites. You can see on the left just an insane amount of produce, and on the right just a very large quantity of packaged goods being disposed. The disposal ban that we brought in included all food, whether it's packaged or not. There are depackaging services available in Metro Vancouver, although it's still a growing industry and service. We had a lot of challenges with our disposal bans. We enforce them at the end of the pipe, so when a waste hauler brings a truck full of waste and they tip it at our disposal sites, we have inspectors that look at it, and on a visual basis they say, well, there's too much of this or too much of that, and then they assess a surcharge, 50% more on the regular tipping fee. Well, that works really great if all the garbage in your region comes to your facility where your inspectors are. In Metro Vancouver, on any given year, we can have up to 10% of the waste from businesses being taken by private haulers, loaded onto rail cars, and taken down to cheap landfills in the States. Cheap landfills in the States that have no disposal bans, and certainly don't have any of our inspectors at them. We're helped by the fact that the exchange rate is really unfavorable right now, and that's kept it under control this year, but that won't last forever. Enforcement itself is quite a challenge. If you look at those loads again, even though our inspectors can do a visual assessment and say there's more than 25% food waste by volume in that load, even if they've got a photograph, it can still be disputed in court, and it is. In fact, we've got some companies that are disputing every single ban surcharge that we've assessed them on. In the in the commercial and institutional sector and in multifamily residential buildings, we have the same challenges that every other place has had. We're not the first place in Canada, obviously, to have a disposal ban on organics. That honor goes to Halifax, who did it about 17 years ago. And we're not even the first place in British Columbia. That was Nanaimo, and that was about 10 years ago. Nonetheless, when we brought in our organics disposal ban, commercial businesses and multifamily residents all said, or many of them said, it can't be done. It's impossible. There's no space, there's no access. There'll be, in the summertime, there'll be flies and dragons and tigers drawn to the food. And we had to keep reminding them that organics disposal bans have been done many other places. And there are organics programs in large American cities that are older and more space constrained than Metro Vancouver is. Another challenge was food soil paper and biodegradable foodware. When we first brought in the organics disposal ban, we wanted to include the ban on all food soil paper, so pizza boxes and napkins and serviettes and paper plates and so on. What we eventually came to the conclusion, though, that we couldn't include those things, at least not at this time. So we left them out. The problem was that not all food soil paper was readily identifiable, and it's easy to confuse a purely paper cup with a cup that's lined with polyethylene, for example, and therefore not compostable. Similarly, there's biodegradable foodware, which can easily be confused with non-biodegradable foodware. And the processors of compost in our region are private companies, and some of them accept certain things and some of them don't. So we had to go basically with the lowest common denominator. And packaged foods, as I mentioned, was also a challenge, although we eventually held true to our principles and said we're including it in the ban. Public response was kind of predictable. As I mentioned, everybody thought that we were the first place in the universe that had ever done an organics disposal ban. So we had sort of two surges in interest from the media and the public, one around the time the ban started on January 1st, 2015, and one when we started the actual enforcement on July 1st of 2015. Incidentally, my tip for you, anyone that's thinking of putting in an organics disposal ban, do not have it start on January 1st, because if you are the director of solid waste planning in that region, you will get asked to do radio interviews live at 6 a.m. on January 1st. It's not pretty. The end result is that we've got a pretty high level of compliance. In the first period before we actually started the enforcement, we only had about 15 loads a month where we had to hand out these education notices, warning notices. And once we started the enforcement, we were only looking at about 12 loads a month. We don't actually try and publicize that number too often. We're actually just trying to let people have the impression that we're looking at every single load, and if there's a little bit of food waste in there, by God, we're going to catch you. That isn't actually the case, and no, there aren't that many loads, but it's good for getting the message out that we are looking. And certainly there's been a great opportunity among the local service providers to sell the service of organics pickup on that basis. Certainly the amount of organics processed in the region is noticeably higher. This is the quarter by quarter comparison for the last few years of the amount of organic material that's being passed through our local composting facilities. As you can see, the black set of columns is for 2015. It varies a little bit because these composting facilities also take yard trimmings, and so it's a little hard, it's actually impossible to see food waste all by itself, but there is a significant increase. Overall, it's about a 10% improvement on the monthly tonnage or quarterly tonnage that's going through. Similarly, as you would expect, as more organics are being diverted into composting, we also see less organics in the garbage. Our last waste audit showed that the percentage of compostable organics in our garbage had gone down from 36 to 28%. If you actually convert that into tonnages, it's about, what is that? About 70,000 tons a year less in the garbage. We also did surveys of businesses, and they're not quite comparable, but we did one in 2012 where we surveyed restaurants specifically to see how many of them had programs for separating and composting their organics. And at the time, we found that it was about 1 in 4, I think it was. Yeah, 1 in 4 restaurants had a program like that. In 2015, we did another follow-up survey, and this time it was not just restaurants, but also hospitality, multifamily, grocers, and large institutions. And we found that actually it was up to, oops, no I don't. It was up to 3 out of 4 businesses that had an organics program in place. Of course, the media jumped on that and said, 25% of your businesses are not in compliance yet. How horrible is that? And we were actually saying, well, actually, the glass is half full here. We've gone from 1 out of 4 to 3 out of 4. That's actually a really good improvement, and there's still more coming online all the time. Before, in 2012, we asked businesses, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenges with an organics disposal ban? Predictable responses. The one that did not actually emerge as an actual concern after the organics disposal ban was a lack of information and places to send their organics. There's this perception among businesses that there just wasn't any place that could deal with it, and there wasn't any information available. In 2015, we actually had nobody who said that was a concern. We've got a whole bunch of supporting initiatives for the organics disposal ban and for reducing food waste in general. I won't go through them all. They're listed here, and you can link to all of them at that website. One of the ones that is not listed there, and I did not list it because it was I described it as a dismal failure. You'd heard Steve talk about the WINNOW program, or the WINNOW system in the UK for measuring and identifying and quantifying food waste in restaurants. Well, we took a similar system, the LeanPath system out of the US, and we went out and we bought 6 sets of it, so the laptops and the tablets and the scales and the licenses. And then we tried to go out to restaurants and convince them to give it a try. And maybe it was our breath, but we really got virtually no uptake on that one. So we completely misjudged the market on that in our area. Lots of different resources that we put together, guides, some in multiple languages, case studies and videos and so on. You've heard about Love Food, Hate Waste, so I won't talk about that. One of the things that we did to support the ban, though, and food waste reduction in general was the Food Isn't Garbage campaign. This is one that has been running since late 2014, so just before the ban started. Basically, we had various food items turned into, cute, slightly disturbing images, reminding people that things go into their green bin, the residential green bin, and not their garbage. This is actually from our second round. So the first set of images was things like, let me see, there was a watermelon and a pork chop and a sandwich or something. Those were straightforward. People identify that as food. What people didn't really think of as food or stuff that could go in the green bin were things like clamshells and paper, food-soiled paper. Now, yes, I did say that food-soiled paper is not banned. However, there are definitely food-soiled paper items that we would encourage people to include in their compost. Liability was mentioned by a couple of other speakers, and we had worked, Metro Vancouver had worked through putting on our National Zero Waste Council hat. We'd worked with a number of other agencies on updating a food donation guide, and the food donation guide is put together actually under the banner of the BC Centre for Disease Control. So this is a guide that not only tells businesses or potential donors about their liability or lack of liability in donating food, but also, more importantly, talks about things like how to prepare food properly for donation, and very importantly, that certain foods are the kinds of healthy foods that need to be donated and others are not. And that formed the basis for another initiative that I'll talk about in a minute. Food labeling also talked about quite a bit here. The Canada Food Inspection Agency is, as many of you know, currently reviewing the food labeling requirements. Metro Vancouver, again, through the National Zero Waste Council, has been whining to the CFIA about changes we would like to see in food labeling, and we tried to be as specific as possible about eliminating food labels from certain products and increasing the length of them in others and so on, and increasing legibility, also hiding certain food labeling like sell-by dates, which can be completely misunderstood by consumers. And finally, the food donation tax incentive. Again, this is something that Metro Vancouver has been working on through the National Zero Waste Council. We looked at the amount of food that is edible and still being disposed by businesses. And I have to stress, this is for businesses, not for residents, which is a whole another large amount, and it's not by the agricultural industry. This is strictly for businesses, and we also looked at only the businesses in urban areas. So these, we figured, were the potential donors for edible food that was being disposed. Quantifying it, it was something on the order of 130,000 tons a year of perfectly edible food that was going to landfill from urban businesses. Converting that, though, into meals, it was about 300 million meals. Converting that into greenhouse gases, which was our real interest from an environmental standpoint, that's the equivalent of 275,000 cars. So potentially you could divert that equivalent of GHGs from disposal. The other thing I should mention, I think at the beginning of the day, Kate had mentioned that this is quite a controversial proposal, and the controversy arises around really two things. One is a concern that it doesn't address the root causes of poverty. We completely agree. I would just say that this was never meant to address that, and increasing food donation to the needy and dealing with the root causes of poverty are two things that are not mutually exclusive. You can and should do both. The second thing is that some of the criticisms or the concerns about this are that it could be done the wrong way, that it could encourage, for example, unhealthy food to be donated. And yes, there's absolutely a right way and a wrong way to do things. What we're trying to do is get the federal government to consider implementing this and implementing it in the right way. So it's not a blanket statement that we'll do this and it'll be wide open. It's very much our intent that it be done properly.